Before history is written, it's played. Before it's frozen in time, it's fought one shift at a time. Before it's etched in silver, it's carved in ice. What happens next will last forever. The Stanley Cup Final on ABC and ESPN Plus begins Saturday.
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become?
Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
The delicious ice-cold taste of Dr. Pepper has a lasting effect on people. Lindsay from Sacramento said,
Pro tip, 40 degrees is the perfect temperature for an ice-cold Dr. Pepper.
Why is 40 degrees the perfect temperature for Dr. Pepper? We brought in Sue from Duluth, Minnesota to tell us.
Oh, yeah, I know a thing or two about cold. Oh, that right there is the perfect kind of ice-cold for Dr. Pepper. I'd share that with my friend Nancy. She likes Dr. Pepper, too, you know. My coldest...
All right, that'll be all, Sue. Having a perfect temperature for your Dr. Pepper? It's a pepper thing. Inspired by real fan posts.
Salah. Escape Cancelo. Oh, it's brilliant from Mo Salah. And still, Salah. Oh, sensational! Son had a goal and scored a beauty.
Oh, what a strike from Yuri Tielemans.
De Bruyne. And it is Ward-Prowse. Martinelli, gorgeous. Still going up. Oh, he's done it again.
And City have won the Premier League.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, EPL Index proudly brings to you the best prediction podcast in the world, A Tad Predictable, with your host, Tadiwa Chanakira.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of A Tad Predictable, the post-season edition. Obviously, we've started our series, which I was really excited about, where we are doing effectively Cliff Notes version for you guys with all the teams that are going to be participating in the English Premier League next season. Each episode is going to be dedicated to one of those 20 teams. We'll be looking at what they did last season, what their goals are going to be for next season, and obviously what they need to do in this summer transfer window in order to achieve those goals. We discussed Arsenal yesterday, so if you guys missed that one, please do go check that out after you've listened to this episode on Aston Villa, who obviously I waxed quite lyrical about when I did our post-season review of the Premier League last year. Unai Emery won our coach of the season last year when we gave our awards. Obviously, we had some strong feelings about the English Premier League's current version of their awards that they give. But yeah, you can also go and listen to that episode if you do fancy. But before we get into Aston Villa and everything that's going to be happening for them in the summer, I thought we may as well just look at some of the news that is going around in the Premier League at the moment. We won't go into too much detail, but obviously we are a Premier League based podcast, and I think as we're doing the series, we can always look at what is in the news on the day we're recording. So obviously at the day of recording, we can see that Tosin has finally been announced by Chelsea. So he's now a Chelsea player, obviously coming over from Fulham on a free transfer. So congratulations to Chelsea. We'll obviously get to Chelsea in terms of their team, and we'll dive into detail about this transfer and all the other transfers they might be involved in this coming season. But also, if you're looking at Leicester City, they're going to be coming up, and we've seen that Dennis Prayer, Mark Albrighton, Ian Nacho, they've all left Leicester City as free agents. I think probably the big one, in my opinion, the Albrighton one, because he's been so pivotal to all things Leicester City for so many years. But obviously, you know, Father Time, or it's undefeated. You cannot defeat it, and it catches up to everyone. And obviously it was time for him to head off to pastures new. I think in terms of other news that really caught my attention, I guess it was to do with Man United sort of starting to declare that Gareth Southgate, or not necessarily declare, but hinting that Gareth Southgate is the one that they want to appoint if they get rid of Ten Hag. I think they're in that awkward situation where they probably, if there is a deal in place, they probably can't really announce that signing before the Euros. You don't want that distraction to be there from an England perspective. So maybe there's some gamesmanship there. They're being quite open about the fact that he is their number one choice. But again, let's wait and see. Obviously, you got to feel for Ten Hag, wins a trophy and then could be out of a job. But I'm sure he'll land on his feet. In terms of other news in the Premier League, I think maybe Graham Potter, it's getting confirmed that he's not going back to Brighton. I think it's always difficult for a manager going back to a club where they did do well at, because the pressure and the expectation is going to be much higher when you come back, because everyone's going to remember the good times, maybe not necessarily the bad times. And I would have wondered how Brighton fans would have felt him coming back after him, leaving them for Chelsea, whether or not that they would have been accepting of the way he left. But yeah, interesting that he's certainly not coming back. So they're going to be looking elsewhere for their new manager. And it certainly will be interesting to see who they do end up signing. Another interesting thing in the Premier League, and then we'll dive in to the Aston Villa, for me, is the Julian Alvarez talk is starting to heat up. It looks like he's got a lot of offers on the table in terms of outside the Premier League, but also in the Premier League. Chelsea are being rumoured as one of those teams that could potentially be going in for him. So we'll keep a close eye on that one. Seems like Chelsea are going to be busy once again this off-season. But again, some of those clubs in the Premier League have sort of a self-imposed, I guess, deadline when it comes to transfers, because we know before the 1st of July, there are a whole host of Premier League teams that do need to sell players in order to make sure that they are in line with the profit and sustainability rules that are in place. So keep an eye for some deals, maybe some bargain deals that teams will be able to get and target some of these teams that we know need to sell players. So yeah, that's probably one to keep an eye on whether or not some of the clubs are going to be held to the fire and if they're going to be able to sell players in time. Specifically, those clubs, it's Chelsea, which is interesting because they're making signings, but Chelsea need to sell players before June the 30th to comply with PSR. Aston Villa need to sell some players. Obviously, we're going to dive into what Aston Villa need to do in this window. They've got Douglas Luiz, who's in talks at the moment, but as I said, they're the focus of this podcast. So we will get to them. Newcastle are one of those teams that need to make sure they're compliant, along with Everton, Nottingham Forest, and Leicester City. So all of those teams are under pressure. Perhaps some of the other Premier League teams might be looking to take advantage of maybe their desperation when it gets closer to that 30th of June deadline. But guys, and girls, as I mentioned, Aston Villa is a team that will be focusing on this podcast. A very, very successful season for Aston Villa, in my opinion. I mean, looking at what they did this season, they were involved in the Premier League, the FA Cup, the Carabao Cup, and the Europa Conference League. Let's start with the Europa Conference League, where they lost in the semi-finals. Now, probably the longer the tournament went on, the more they were favourites to go and win that one. So maybe they would have been a bit disappointed to not have been able to get over the line and be able to beat Olympiacos. But yeah, credit to Olympiacos who went on to the finals. For the Europa Conference League, obviously for Aston Villa, they've got bigger fish to fry in terms of next season. They've gone to the creme de la creme of European football. They've skipped Europa League. They've jumped from Europa Conference all the way to the Champions League. So it will be interesting to see how they will be able to handle that one. Obviously, it's imperative that they do bolster their squad, but maybe some solace in the fact that they lost to the eventual winners. I know maybe sometimes it's a bit easier to take when your team lost to the team that ended up winning it, and not necessarily just the team that got to the finals. So yeah, slight disappointment there maybe from their end to not have been able to make it to the final. But irrespective of that, I still think semi-finals was admirable, especially considering the Premier League, they got fourth. So they were in the thick of it in the Premier League. They set themselves up really well early on in the first half of the season. And I think that just helped them continue their wave into the second season when it got busy with obviously the FA Cup got brought in along with their European commitments. I mean, it was insane what they did this season. I thought they did really well. Speaking of the FA Cup, they went out in the fourth round. I think the target would have been finish as high as we can in the Premier League and make a real go of it in the Conference League. And I think they were okay with going out in the FA Cup. They obviously lost in the fourth round to Chelsea, having had that draw in the fourth round. I know the whole replays in the FA Cup was a big topic, and this was one of those teams that had to endure the replay. They played Chelsea on the 26th of January and then had to do that quick turnaround and play them on the 7th of February, where they lost 3-1 in the FA Cup, having gone through from the third round, beating Middlesbrough. In the Carabao Cup, they were one and done, entered in the third round, lost 2-1 to Everton. And again, maybe that helped them in the beginning of the season with how well they did to set themselves up in the Premier League and also how strong they were looking in Europe as well. So yeah, overall, I think it's a phenomenal season for them. Fourth in the Premier League, out of the cups early, the domestic cups early, and then a semi-final in Europe. I think it's a club that's building and growing and will continue to want to improve heading into next season. And that will be the aim next season. Can we solidify fourth again? To be able to get into the Champions League again. Unless you go and win it. Maybe they go and win it and they don't need to worry about fourth. But can you get fourth, or at the very least, maybe fifth will be enough next season for the Premier League teams. But as we've seen this season, it's dangerous to try and rely on or bank on England getting that fifth spot. It ended up burning, obviously, the team that finished fifth this year, and we'll get to them on their episode. But fourth place, very, very good. The aim next season will be, can we maintain fourth, stay in a Champions League position? And once you establish yourself, if you get back-to-back Champions League season, now the quality of your squad is improving because you're buying Champions League caliber players or players that prefer to be in the Champions League year on year, and it's just bulking up the strength and depth of your squad in a nice way. So if they can do back-to-back Champions League, I think that will be phenomenal. In terms of the Champions League tournament itself, I know that, that there's the dream of it. Obviously, it will be exciting to be in it, but I think the goal is let's just not embarrass ourselves. Okay, if we can be competitive in games and give a good account of ourselves, I don't think they should be pushing too hard to go too far in that tournament, because I don't know if they can win it. And if they go too far, let's say if they go quarters, semis, finals, if it swings their way in that perspective, I think their league form might suffer. I think they don't have enough players that have that Champions League caliber week in, week out to sustain that and a top four race next season. Because I think that top four race, it's going to be very, very crowded next season. There are going to be a lot of teams that are wanting to either get back into the Champions League or stay in the Champions League. So yeah, I think the focus should be league. Again, I think the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup, it would be nice to win, but I think they should just focus on securing Champions League for another season. And if they can do that, they'll have set themselves up really, really nicely long term to become a real force again in the Premier League. And how fun would that be to have Aston Villa being a real force again? I'd very much look forward to that. As you can tell, I'm quite fond of the way Aston Villa have rejuvenated themselves over the last couple of years. Huge thanks in part to their owners, very ambitious. And they've spent quite a bit of money since the last time they got relegated. So they are making sure that they can do everything they can in order to continue to improve. If I'm not mistaken, I'm getting it in my ear, it's a net spend of over 300 million since they were last promoted. So they've definitely been willing to put money in, and it will be interesting to see then if they continue that trend heading into this summer window. We know, for example, they're going to be active because there's a lot of rumors and transfer talk when it comes to Aston Villa. So let me kick us off by looking at that Aston Villa squad as it is at the moment. Now, I'll start off by saying it's a good squad. I think they've got a lot of talented players in there. Now, what it is being able to have this squad that can be both competitive in the Champions League and in the Premier League. Obviously, with the Europa Conference League last year, I do feel that Aston Villa were afforded an opportunity to not have to be able to get away with not fielding a strong starting 11 in that tournament and still getting far. You're not going to be able to do that in the Champions League. You're probably going to have to play your starting 11 more often than not if you want to advance far in that tournament. And again, as I said, if they do that, are the players going to be able to have that quick turnaround and deliver in a Premier League game, that following week? And the danger as well with new entrants to the Champions League or teams that haven't been there for a while is, can you get your players to be as motivated for, let's say, Wolverhampton away or...
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become? Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
This podcast is sponsored by Monarch Money. Are you saving to reach your financial goals? Reaching those goals isn't just about getting more money, but by managing what you have. And the best way to manage your money? Monarch Money. Monarch Money is a new kind of finance app that's intuitive, powerful, ad-free, and takes the headaches out of budgeting. Try it free when you go to monarchmoney.com/podcast. Monarch puts all your accounts, investments, transactions, and finances at your fingertips. With a complete view of your finances, you'll gain insights on your spending and find new ways to save. Plus, Monarch lets you customize your dashboard, collaborate with your partner, set custom budgets and goals, and track your progress toward them. See why Mint users are turning to Monarch Money and loving it, and why the Wall Street Journal named Monarch Money the best budgeting app overall. Get a 30-day free trial when you go to monarchmoney.com/podcast. That's MONARCH money.com/podcast for your free trial. monarchmoney.com/podcast.
Looking at the table here, who can I say? A Bournemouth away and an Everton away, a Fulham away game, either the week, on the Sunday or the Saturday, knowing they've got, say, I don't know, let's take the champions, or a Real Madrid midweek. We know that, also the fans. Are the fans, let's say you got a home game against a Leicester City that you're expecting to win, but you've got a Champions League game midweek against an Inter Milan or a Barcelona or something like that. Is the crowd going to be up for that Premier League game as much as knowing, in a couple of days we've got the home game against the European giant, like those type of things, the motivations, the consistency, it's going to be interesting to see how they manage it. I wouldn't be surprised, because it's Unai Emery, I wouldn't be surprised if we find Aston Villa in the Europa League next season. You know, obviously they're in the Champions League, but if they don't do well in that, but do well enough to get dropped into the Europa League and then make a go of it in the Europa League, I think that could be fun, because we all know Unai Emery in the Europa League, that's his bag, man. That's his tournament. He's gonna kill it. You know he's gonna kill it there. So you know what, that's what I'm hoping Aston Villa do, because I want to see them be competitive and go for a trophy next season. And I think the best route for them would be dropping into Europa League, using that Unai Emery experience in that tournament and going and winning it. Yeah, that would be fun. Wow. I'm all set for that now. I'm all tell me, mention in the comments, you know, call me, tweet at me on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. I'll always call it Twitter, I guess. Let me know what you think of that plan. Let's boycott. Well, no, it's not boycotting the Champions League. We'll enjoy the Champions League as Aston Villa, but then make sure that we're in the Europa League come the knockout stages, so that we can go on and win that and use Unai Emery's experience in that tournament. So yeah, that will be interesting to see. Now, as I said, the Aston Villa squad itself, I'm looking at one player in particular that I thought we should start with, because I thought it was a very, very unique and interesting situation. One that we might see some of these clubs that are speaking about that are in trouble with PSR or could become in trouble with PSR is Aston Villa obviously had on their books Cameron Archer. They sold him to Sheffield United for, I think it was 17 or 18 million in the last transfer window. It was 18.5. Thank you. 18.5. They sold him. But it turns out that there was a clause in that sale where if Sheffield United got relegated from the Premier League this season, Aston Villa had an obligation to buy back Cameron Archer for 14 million. So, and the beauty with that, and I guess the minutiae with that, this is why I'm saying this could become quite common maybe going forward, is the way they structured this deal is, because it's a transfer and not a loan, you know, on the books, they can use that to sort of alleviate some of that pressure on PSR. So I thought that was really good, because at the end of the day, it was a loan for 4 million, you know, sell him for 18.5, they get relegated, you buy him back for 14. Yeah, effectively a loan for 4.5 million, right? But by making it a transfer, they've cleared obviously him off of their books and allowed that money to come in. And it's just really, really smart. I wonder if other teams are going to start employing that more often, and or if the Premier League has anything to say about it, whether or not they're going to try and stop that going forward. So yeah, that's Cameron Archer. Obviously, he's now come back to Aston Villa. Unai Emery is saying that he's going to be involved in pre-season. He's going on the tour with the team, so I guess he'll get a chance to impress and maybe stay with the team. But because I was money conscious when I was looking at the transfers that Aston Villa should be making, I've actually gone and loaned him back out. This time a traditional loan. Maybe they do the transfer thing again. That would be interesting. But a traditional loan to Southampton with an obligation to buy, I think 20 million. Between 17 and 20 million is what I'm thinking. So that's Cameron Archer done and dusted. I thought we'd start with him because it's a very, very unique situation, and one we've not seen too often in the Premier League, but maybe could become a tool for teams to sort of move money around in maybe one of the grey areas of football finances. But yeah, so in terms of the rest of the squad, I was looking at, the players that are on the fringes / probably sellable assets, looking at Courtney House, really, really torrid time at Aston Villa for him. I think the best thing to do for both parties is for him to just leave on a transfer, get him out. I've got him going to Ipswich for 1.5 million. A promoted team, one of the promoted teams, get him in there. They will need, obviously, the experience of someone that's been in the Premier League just to help bolster their defensive ranks. So, yeah, I think that could be a decent thing for Aston Villa to do, to try and find him a move within the Premier League, maybe one of those promoted teams. We'll see if he's interested in such a move. We know he's more willing now to leave Aston Villa because of the sort of situation that he's had there. Another player that's on the way out, I think, is Leander Dendoncker, one of those highly touted players when he came into the Premier League. Ambidextrous, can play with both feet, really good passing range. Obviously, they got him from Wolves. He's not settled in maybe the way that they would have wanted him. I think he could have been a decent squad player for them, but I think that the clock has ticked on them. And I've got him going in a move that is going to help another move be facilitated. So he's going to be a midfielder leaving, and he's going to help bring in another midfielder for Aston Villa, but I will speak about that in a bit. Another player, Philippe Coutinho, I mean, that's just a wage that's been on their books that needs to go. You can thank Steven Gerrard for that signing. I didn't think it made sense at the time. It's obviously not worked out, unfortunately, for both parties. But again, yeah, listen to the season review podcast if you want to hear my thoughts on Steven Gerrard, the manager. I love Steven Gerrard, the player, but Steven Gerrard, the manager, not my cup of tea. So I've got Philippe Coutinho going back to his original club, Vasco da Gama in Brazil. I know that they've had talks with Vasco da Gama. If I'm not mistaken, they're probably having the talks today, in terms of in-person talks, that is. They've had talks verbally and sort of looked at how Coutinho could come in. He's willing to take the pay cut. I think they were talking 60 to 70% pay cut in order for him to join Vasco da Gama. So yeah, I believe today, if I'm not mistaken, so which would be Friday the 6th, that is when they're going to have the in-person to try and see if they can hash this deal out. Another player that probably needs to go just to help him get his career back on track. He had that massive ACL injury, unfortunately, at the beginning of last season. It's Emi Buendia. I mean, it could go either way. Either Villa could keep him and sort of have him have his rehabilitation season with them this season, and then they can assess whether or not they want to keep him long term. But I've got him loaned out to Sevilla. I think that could be a smart way for, obviously they've got the Monchi links there with Sevilla, but I do believe having him out on loan, getting sort of slowly back into it, getting him in the shop window where he'll probably get a lot more minutes there than he would at Aston Villa would be a smart move. We know Sevilla struggled last season. They ended up finishing 14th in La Liga, so they don't have, European football next season. But what can happen is maybe some of their players will want to be leaving after the disappointing season. Bring Emi Buendia in. He then gets an opportunity to play for them. I think that could be a smart way to get him off the books and also to help him sort of get his feet and career back on track. So I've got Emi Buendia going on loan to Sevilla. As I mentioned, Cameron Archer going to Southampton on loan with an option to buy. Philippe Coutinho transfer to Vasco da Gama. Leander Dendoncker moving. I'll mention the club in a bit. Courtney House going to one of the promoted teams. I've got him going to Ipswich at the moment. Then, obviously, the big transfer, Douglas Luiz. It looks like he wants out. It looks like, there are discussions with the likes of Juventus and potentially a swap type deal. Obviously, Juventus will have to put a bit more on the top with Weston McKennie. So having done that, it means they swap places. Obviously, I've put transfer fees on both of them. It's not like a player plus. I've just done separate transfers for them because it looks like Monchi has been lowballing with regards to Weston McKennie, and there are a bit of issues with the valuations there. Juventus are valuing him, closer to the 15 to 20 million mark. At the moment, Aston Villa want to pay about half of that, about 10. But I think it evens out at 15. I do think it ends up getting done. West McKennie to Aston Villa for 15 million. And on the other end of it, Douglas Luiz, he gets his move to Juventus. 58 million is what I've put there. I know Aston Villa want about 60, but I think a compromise can be reached there, 58. It will be interesting to see if Juventus can secure the Douglas Luiz move, because we know there's the likes of Arsenal that have flirted with him in the past. Man United could be a team that could be creeping up, is what is being rumoured at the moment. So that's one to keep an eye on, whether or not he stays in the Premier League. But if he doesn't, obviously Juventus are favourites to land him. So I've gone ahead and done that. So that's quite a lot of business done in terms of getting players out. What about the players that would then be coming in to replace them? Well, we'll certainly be discussing those after this short break. So stay tuned and we'll be back after this short break. All right, we are back. As I was saying, what about the transfers in? Well, I'm looking at the squad. I'm looking at what is needed in order to fill the squad after all those players have been sold and have gone. And if you're looking at that, I think obviously you need the replacement for Douglas Luiz. I also think that Aston Villa need a starting centre-back in order to drop Douglas Costa down, or Diego Costa rather, down into the sort of depth position. If they can do that, I think they'll be setting themselves up quite nicely. And then there are questions as well. What do they do at right back? I've kept the Konza Cash combination there, but that's probably one to look out for to see if they do end up doing something there. So yeah, in terms of the starting lineup, it is the Douglas Luiz replacement. It's a centre-back coming in, and then sort of the rest of the signings will be filling the holes in the squad depth positions, bringing in some midfielders, bringing in some attacking players that can play out wide, play in the middle, because we know Aston Villa like those fluid players that, the McGinns, that can play out wide, they can play in the middle, and facilitate all of that. So I've looked at some of the people that they could be looking to get, and then obviously I'll let you know who I have signed. I haven't, and I don't know if they will sell Ollie Watkins, because at present the only team that's really been linked recently is Liverpool. I don't know if they would pull the plug on the Darwin Núñez experience this early and go and get an Ollie Watkins and say he's the one to lead the line. Maybe they do. Maybe Liverpool come in. I mean, they've got the new coach, the new regime. Maybe they were looking to go in a different direction. But yeah, for this exercise, I think I've kept Ollie Watkins at Aston Villa. They've got Champions League football now. I think they've got enough to be able to convince him to stay, to want to play that year of Champions League with Aston Villa. If it ends up not working out, fine. You can leave with our blessing would probably be the message that he's getting at the moment. And with his situation, he's got a contract until 2028. So there's not really any pressure on Aston Villa to sell him, unless obviously maybe hands in a transfer request or is very insistent on leaving, and it ends up causing problems, and it's probably better to get rid of him than to keep him. If that is the case, if it ends up being a case where they do need to get rid of him, I've got a list here of players that I do think would be good replacements for him, from top to bottom in terms of preference. I think you go and get Gyökeres from Sporting Lisbon. Obviously, we know he was in the lower divisions in England. He's moved to Sporting. He's been phenomenal at Sporting this past season. And I think it would just be such a statement signing for them to, okay, we've gotten rid of Ollie Watkins, bring in Gyökeres and sort of make that statement of we've brought in another exciting striker that's got good movement, good in the air, good finishing. I think that I don't think the fans would miss Ollie Watkins too much if they're able to land Victor. That would be phenomenal. Obviously, it would be pricey. I believe the asking price for him at the moment is around the £65 million mark. So maybe they could get that much for Ollie Watkins and it ends up just paying for itself. So that's one to look out for, to see if Ollie Watkins ends up paying for his replacement. Then that's the guy that I'd go and get. Another one that I'd go and maybe look to get is Brian Brobbery. Obviously, he's trying to he was rejuvenating his career last season with Ajax. He had that stint where he went to RB Leipzig. It didn't quite work out for him. He's come back to Ajax, and I think he's having a better stint this time around. So that could be one. Yes, it might be a risky one. He's 21, young. He's still got a lot to improve on, but I like the physicality. I think he will be able maybe to handle that transition from the Eredivisie slightly better than some of the other players we've seen come from Eredivisie, and we've seen that the gap is quite hard to breach for players from there. So that would be the caution, that he's coming from a league where we've seen players struggle coming to the Premier League, but also I do think he's got the physicality and the characteristics to be able to make a name for himself in the Premier League and be able to hold his own. So that would be a younger option if they do want to go that route. But, I don't know if they want to go younger again. They've obviously got Duran there as well. So having two young guys, consistency might become an issue. It might be a lot to put on a young player to come in and have to lead the line for Champions League football for us. The other player then, I'll then look at Tammy Abraham. There have been flirtations between Tammy and Aston Villa in the past. There have been flirtations again this time around. He's one of those players that if Ollie Watkins does get sold, I do think he's going to be one of the players Aston Villa will be looking to bring in. But as I said, I think you go get Victor. Don't even mess about. Just pay pay the 60, whatever it costs to bring him in, and hopefully it's sort of the same money that you got from Watkins, and it pays for itself there. So yeah, so I've kept Watkins though. I've kept Watkins. I think it was pivotal for them to get Champions League to be able to entice him to stay, and I think that's going to be enough to keep him there. So in terms of that midfielder to replace Douglas Luiz, so you was sort of looking for an energetic midfielder, good on the ball, can finish as well as be strong in the tackle. So sort of like an all-round midfielder. I think a smart choice would be Onana from Everton. And again, it's part of the deal that I was talking about earlier. You send Dendoncker to Everton and you say, look, you guys can have Dendoncker. I think they could probably do that deal for around 8.5, maybe for Dendoncker. And then obviously you bring in Onana. Everton want about 50 for him. I don't know if it will get to 50, but if I'm Aston Villa, I'm waiting until closer to the 30th of June. And then making a bid in the 40s, and hopefully it works out. But again, you'd hope that by that time they've got the Douglas Luiz money in and are able to then get their replacement for less than what they got for the Douglas Luiz money, just to help with that PSR stuff that they've also got to worry about. The shortlist had Cheick Doucouré from Crystal Palace on there. I know he's coming off of a really good start at Crystal Palace, but unfortunately for him, the injury is maybe something that could be you want to be cautious about. But yeah, he would be a decent signing, I think, as well for them. And then the other two players that I've put in there are players that they have been rumored to be linked with in recent weeks. It's Alex Garcia from Girona, also an energetic midfielder that could do the job there. And then Gabri Viega, more of the attacking-minded midfielder. So I don't know if he quite meets, what they would want from that position. But the interesting thing with the Garcia one is it looks like West Ham might be able to pip them. If it was a player that they did want, West Ham look like the team that are going to be getting him. They're making very aggressive moves to try and land him. So Onana comes in midfield. You've got Weston McKenna as backup. We know that Aston Villa are close to agreeing a deal for Ross Barkley, about 5 million for him to come in. He can obviously, as I said, cover a lot of different positions. You got Weston McKenna who can cover a lot of positions. You bring in the more specialist midfielder there in Onana. And then also They've been flirting with Gio Lo Celso. I know it's a player that Unai Emery likes. His future at Tottenham is clear that he's no longer going to be a Tottenham player. They're looking to sell him. He's looking to leave. So Gio Lo Celso, I think if you bring him in as well, sort of maybe as the Buendia replacement, and he adds a bit more depth to that bench, I think would do really well. So that's the midfield sorted out. I think that's a strong enough collective. You've obviously still got the Ramseys. You've got Kamara in there. That's going to be pivotal for next season. Let's move to the centre-back situation. As I said, I wanted to bring in a starting centre-back just to improve the depth of that position for them. They had the massive Mings injury last season. It's going to take him a while to get back up to the pace of things, so you don't want to have to be too reliant on him next season. So the shortlist had Maxence Lacroix in there from Wolfsburg. We know he's been touted to leave them this coming transfer window. I've also looked at Cuenca, Jorge Cuenca from Villarreal. Obviously, Unai Emery going to his old club, getting one of their young, exciting centre-backs to come and join him at Aston Villa. That would be a very exciting signing. But I've gone ahead and looked at maybe a signing with homegrown talent in mind. I think you go and get Guehi from Crystal Palace. It seems like Crystal Palace could be a team that could be quite cash rich come the end of this, or at some point during this transfer window, and may have to then go and obviously spend that money to replace some of the players that are being touted to leave. But I think where he would fit so well with this Unai Emery style, he's got the pace, he's got the confidence on the ball to partner Pau Torres. I think that would be a phenomenal partnership. Have Pau Torres and Guehi in the back line there. So that would mean the transfers in for them are Ross Barkley, Weston McKennie, Gio Lo Celso, Mark Guehi, Amadou Onana, and then obviously that weird one of Archer, who came back just to go out again. But yeah, I think if Villa can do that, I think they set themselves up for a really good season next season, as I said, with the goal of making top four again next season and seeing what bonus they can get in all the other trophies and competitions that they are involved with. But guys, I do have to leave it there. I think that covers Aston Villa quite well. Huge thank you to EPL Index in association with Liberty Shield, obviously the presenters of this show. Guys, go and check out Liberty Shield. It's a VPN service that is very easy to install. Use the coupon code EPL25 and you'll get 25% off of your router or the software VPN. Perfect way to keep safe. Whether you're using public Wi-Fi or just, you're at home and you want to make sure that your online data is being kept safe, then definitely go link up with Liberty Shield. If you want to unlock geo-locked content, it's the best way to do it. I can't recommend it any higher. I absolutely love it. I'm so glad that I have it. The NBA finals started early hours of the morning in the UK. Spoiler alert. The Mavericks got destroyed. They got destroyed and they're going to have to adjust in game 2. But you'll be sure that I'll be watching those games. And thanks to Liberty Shield, it's so easy to be able to access the sports in the US or anything else that I want to watch that is international. But guys, that is going to do it for this episode of A Tad Predictable. Obviously, my puppy Milo thinks it's time to go as well. So Milo getting a feature on the podcast, Golden Retriever Labrador mix. He's full of energy. But guys, thank you so much for joining me in this episode. Obviously, the next one, we will be focusing on the next team in the alphabetical order. It's Bournemouth. We'll see what Bournemouth can look to do this summer. But go and check out all of the content on EPL Index. There's all the news. There's all the news that you guys could wish for. Transfer news is covered throughout. There's the Transfer Daily with Dave Davies. He's going to be just giving you nice little tidbits of any transfer updates throughout the week. So definitely go and check that out. There's EPL Roundtable with Kev De Vries. There's also the Two Footed podcast with Dave Hendrick that goes throughout the week as well. Go follow at EPL Index. Go follow at A Tad Predictable. Give us 5 stars. Write positive comments. Subscribe to EPL Index on your podcast channel providers. It really, really does go a long way for us. I've been Tadiwa Chanakira. You can find me on the handle at Tad Predicts. A huge thank you to Obi Semenya and Jody. She's at Spurs 141. He's at John Empire SA. Our producer behind the glass, Mr. Guy Drinkle, and the rest of the team at A Tad Predictable. I've been Tadiwa Chanakira. And remember, Chisinga Perry, Chino Shura.
And still, Salah. Oh, sensational! Son had a go and scored a beauty.
Oh, what a strike from Yuri Tielemans.
De Bruyne! And it is Wood from Martinelli, gorgeous! Still going up. Oh, he's done it again!
And City have won the Premier League!
Sports Social Podcast Network.